So let's go. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. A passage attributed to Theodore Roosevelt. The man in the arena. We are all the men in the arena of our own lives. I've heard legendary fighters who had some of the best coaches you could ever imagine having describe that while they're in the middle of a fight and they go over to the ring and their coach and their ringman are giving them advice. He says to take that into account. It's all well and good. But at the end of the day, you're in the arena. I suppose the idea being that maybe that you're the focal point for decision making. Maybe even that you know best what to do in those situations. You know the very small details about how your body moves, about your biases, your values, your you. And maybe above all that, even if that's wrong, simply the idea that you're the one in that arena. You're the one who chooses. I guess I'll spread off on another tangent when it comes to choice. I don't know if anybody's seen this movie, the name of which escapes me. But the plot of this movie is that there are several magicians who are Robin Hood-esque thieves. And one of the people they pull a magic trick on, they're setting this magic trick up for weeks, months beforehand. They track this one guy whose country's away, some insignificant guy, and they'll flash in his periphery an advertisement for that show. Maybe bump into him and drop a coin that in some way very subtly guides him towards this show they eventually put on. And he ends up being one of the key participants in their great magic trick. And so that brings up a very fascinating question of choice. Like, what exactly is it? How does it work? Is it possible for people to take control of your steering wheel, maybe without you even knowing? And then the image comes to mind of the puppet who never sees the puppeteer, but is being moved along on these strings. And that somehow the idea, jumping to Pinocchio, that it's a good thing to remove yourself from those strings. But I'm not even going to go down that road at the moment. Reeling it back for a second. Being controlled unknowingly. Comes to this quote that, not a quote, but a saying, that the diet is won at the shop, the shop, right, the food market, not in the dining room. Because it's much easier to just not have to constantly look, smell, and have the thoughts popping into your head with all the desires that are associated with those thoughts and smells and those sensory experiences. If you can just remove those stimulants from your environment, the odds of you overeating shoot way down. I've heard people describe that your thoughts are like a diet. And just like a diet, there's a way to overeat, perhaps a way to overthink. I'm sure we've all heard of and experienced overthinking at one point. And that there are toxic foods, junk thoughts that can pop in your head. And a question then arises. How to word this? Is there some equivalent to the junk food being placed in your cabinet when it comes to thoughts and perhaps even emotional states? I imagine a smartphone, a TV would be something like that. Maybe even the automatic recommended feeds when you go on an Instagram, a YouTube, etc., that automatically pop up, right? And you may scroll past that video that you understand isn't optimal to watch at the moment, but it was still there and it still tugged at you for a moment. And you can hit that not interested bar, which is useful. I'm really happy they added that in Instagram and YouTube. But still, how to have an optimal thought cabinet. What would that even look like? I heard the other day there was a study in the 70s in which people had these things. You can tell how much detail I remember, but these things hooked up to different parts of their brain. And they were given 10 minutes, each participant, to go in there and stimulate whatever part of their brain they wanted to. The scientists just wanted to see if people were given the choice, what would you stimulate? And when I heard a Stanford professor, Andrew Huberman, who's the one I heard talking about this on the Jocko podcast, I thought, I don't know, sex drive or just pure excitement and blissful joy, something like that, right? Nope. Turns out what the majority of people clicked on, what emotion they wanted to stimulate, was a certain degree and certain type of rage. The specifics, unfortunately, I can't remember. I'll have to look it up at some point. But that was really interesting, that there could be, maybe it's a joy attached to that rage, even though people don't often think of joy and rage as as similar emotions. In fact, people often describe rage as something negative. But perhaps it's not necessarily joy, but rather meaning, that it feels very meaningful to get pissed off about things and to be angry and heated. And after I listened to that, I started to notice in myself, no, you're good. You can walk in, Dad. Thanks, Dad. Oh, wait, no. Okay, coming back. I started to notice rageful conversations, not like explosive, super intense, nothing but curse words and guttural grunts going on in my head. But I began to notice, maybe if I'm going for a drive that's a long time or something along those lines, if I don't have much to do that's really demanding my focus, that I would habitually play over things to be mad about. Whether that was some time someone in a very small way wronged me, or maybe in big ways in the past that these weren't useful fantasies except for maybe the slight pleasure or a bit of meaning that I felt when wrapped up in these thoughts and these arguments, where I had the fantasy of like really telling that person off, or really like, bam, giving it to the man sort of fantasies. And I recognize like, oh shit, there's a lot of junk food thoughts that I habitually feed on in my downtime. And I was like, oh my god, what would be better to spend my time focusing on? And that could be anything from mindfulness practices, which I highly recommend. They're extremely useful in many different facets of life. A mindfulness practice, the basic one would be focus on your breathing. Don't focus on controlling it. Just focus on your breathing, the natural rhythms of it, and you will definitely stray from that focus. You'll start thinking about a million different fucking things, but the point of the practice is to recognize that you strayed and to refocus yourself. And you build this muscle of being able to refocus yourself on any given task. And it is truly a meta skill. It's in any instance in which focusing on a certain thing or not focusing on certain things is useful, this skill comes in great handy. And it doesn't have to be breathing. It could be maybe I'm driving down the road and I want to just focus on sight, right? Like what's in front of me, the proprioception of my sense of where the car is relative to the ground and the things around me. Like I just want to be focused on that. I don't want to be focused on some thought tangent. I don't want to be focused on jamming to music or a conversation or some flashy sign that I'm driving by. To just be focused on the road and notice when I'm straying and refocus. It can be, from my understanding, really anything in which you are noticing when you stray and refocus. A lot of people have this idea of the mindfulness meditation is just bzzz, there's just nothing going on in the head, and I'm failing if I have nothing going on in the head. I just have all these thoughts keep popping up. Like, no, that's definitely going to happen. And as you do it for a while, every now and then you may notice that you've gone like 10 seconds without thinking a thought. And that's nice, but then you just noticed you were not thinking a thought, and now you're thinking about that, and then you're like, oh shit, gotta refocus. But that's super useful. One of the most useful things that I've just found recently to apply that mindfulness skill to is lustful desires. Lustful desires in relationship to a person that I shouldn't be having those fantasies about. Because for a while, I was trying to just figure it out myself, how to go about overcoming these desires, not being tainted by these desires. And maybe this isn't the best way to go about my psychological health, improving my psychological health, but there's a manga where Beastars, it's great manga, I've really liked their anime, and one of the main characters falls in love with a different species. He's a predator, she's an herbivore, and he wants to overcome this predatory desire. He's ashamed of it. It obviously gets in the way of his relationship, all those sorts of things. And so the psychologist, this really rough and tumble psychologist he gets hooked up with, ends up putting him on a regimen. And one of the things he has to do is sit in a locker with meat, like the frozen meat you'll see in a butcher shop, and just sit with it. Then that's essentially exposure therapy. If you look into behavior therapy at all, that's a very common practice. I've talked a million times about the person who's afraid of the elevator, where you look at pictures of an elevator till you're bored, then you look at an elevator from a distance and you slowly get closer to it. Okay, coming back to it, yes. So I've heard actual psychologists talk about exposure therapy before. So I figure, okay, let me just interact with beautiful people. Not in any lustful, pursuing sort of way. Just have conversations or work out near one, just anything like that. And try to make peace in somehow with these fantasies. But I ended up, there was some utility to that, but eventually it stopped working. Fantasies were getting annoyingly strong in contexts where it was very inappropriate. And it's funny, a lot of people probably wouldn't even recognize that this is going on in my head. I'm good at keeping a very normal face in daily interactions. So moving on, I looked up a video about psychologists describing how to actually weaken these fantasies. And she just described mindfulness practices. Just refocus on something different. Don't try to think away, like explain in your head how to not think about these certain fantasies and feed them. Don't do things that increase like any emotional pleasure attached to these fantasies. Just simply refocus on something that has nothing to do with those fantasies. And so far that's been quite useful. And even if I practice mindfulness and breathing, it translates, it seems to me, to those events and really any other time where I'd like to practice mindfulness, where I'd like to be focused on any given thing. As I've been traveling around, it's a totally new subject, sorry about that. As I've been traveling around, talking to people, different walks of life, yada yada, I still haven't found any reasons that I would consider to be worthwhile, that would justify intense levels of inter-party hatred, political party. I still have a long way to go, but I haven't seen that yet. What I've seen a lot of, disturbing amount of, is when it comes to a modern hot topic that could be anything from gun control, abortion, Ukraine, etc. That if I speak to a layperson, your everyday person, about these sorts of subjects, I've noticed a disturbing amount of confidence in people's assumed righteousness, a lack of inquisitiveness, a lack of wanting to hear steelman arguments or to attempt to create steelman arguments for the opposing side. And I've noticed disrespect jump from 0 to 100 when these conversations are brought up, even if it's with family members or at a party or something along those lines. And it's so strange to think that one of the biggest reasons, and I could, of course, be wrong about this, but one of the biggest reasons one of the biggest reasons families are breaking up over political differences, people don't want their kids marrying people of a different political party in way or higher numbers than has been reported for the last few decades. People ending friendships, so on and so forth. Maybe even going to a civil fucking war. I go to the Joyner Lucas "I'm Not Racist" song. Great song, recommend you listen to it. You stop and listen to it right now. And what you hear are these half-baked understanding of a different sort of person and culture, a different sort of race. You see in the white man, he sees what are in many ways silly and over exaggerated and at times false stereotypes about this other group of people. And then you see from the black man a rage and also assumptions about the other group, about white culture and things along those lines. And I think both of them speak some truth, but both of them, it's like if you watch a movie like Avatar, Blue People Avatar, and you take away at the end of that movie the message that humans are destroying nature and we should do our very best to always be kind and loving to Mother Nature. You don't get, at least through that movie, the other half where nature could plague you with diseases, where fires burst out, hurricanes hit, animals try to hunt you. You see some of the animals trying to hunt you in that movie, but you don't see a justification for deforestation in that movie, a justification for why people at times should eviscerate a landscape and make on top of that houses, hospitals, schools, etc. Why people should at times kill certain amounts of predators in an area so that those predators don't wreak havoc on the people and their family. My point being that in the story of Mother Nature, there is a goddess to that story, and there's a devil to that story. There's the goddess of Mother Nature, and then there's the Mother Nature that tries to tear you apart limb from limb. And it is very important to know that both of those sides of the story exist, and then from that understanding, analyze the current context in whatever situation you happen to be analyzing Mother Nature in. And by the same token, it seemed like in the I'm Not Racist song, both parties involved in that rap only saw one side of the story of the other person. And in the same way, it seems that a lot of people, whether Democrat, Republican, I'll stick with just those two sides for now, I've noticed this lack of desire for wanting to understand the other side of the story. Or maybe the more dangerous part seems to me, thinking you already know everything you need to know about the other side of the story. And it's interesting because a lot of the people, at least that I've seen, spoken with, and keep in mind this is just my observations. I have my own biases and extreme lacks of knowledge in many areas. So I'm very open to being wrong about a lot of the things I'm saying right now. That being said, and what I have seen is a lot of people, let's say you have a family member who watches Fox or CNN or an MSNBC. The people who inform them about the other aisle, the other political aisle, are not people from that political side of the aisle very often. And I don't like where that could lead. I don't like the hostilities that could emerge from that. When I think of racism, when I think of the horrors that have been done in the name of racist beliefs, I'm struck by what seems to me to be the fact that hatred born out of racism is a product of ignorance or of misunderstanding of biology. And even though someone could misunderstand it. In their eyes, they understand it perfectly well. In the eyes of someone who is committing a hate crime, they know race. They know how it works. And they're in the right. And so I'm struck, the reason for me bringing that up is to highlight the point that believing you're right, how intensely have you tried to steel man the opposing side's argument? How solidly have you looked for very, very, very intelligent and powerful arguments or supporters of a belief that you may detest, that you may disagree with? How many people who believe that racism is bad or ill-informed have truly, truly delved deeply into the biology behind race? How many of those people have truly listened deeply to people who support racist ideas, to KK, to Klans members, to Nazis, and really tried to see the world from their perspective? I may get shot for this, but I think that's important, because if you're so confident that you're right, what's the problem? What's the harm in hearing what they have to say and letting them articulate to the best of their ability their side of the argument? Which comes to an interesting freedom of speech question, where it seems that if I were to create a steelman argument to the best of my ability right now against freedom of speech, it might be that just because you win an argument doesn't mean you're right. Just because you cannot rationalize why a certain idea is wrong, that doesn't mean that idea is correct. You could have someone in a debate stage who is just such a fucking skilled debater, or maybe an excellent bullshit artist, that they crush, they eviscerate the other side. Maybe the other side was very well informed. But if this person is so skilled at debate, or maybe of influencing people, so the listener, they could influence the listener to believe they're right, even if in some way maybe their points aren't very strong, or maybe they fluster the other person so much, things to that effect, where you open a door for a con man, or a very intelligent person who's just wrong about something. You open the door to them possibly gaining influence. And so when you open the door of freedom of speech, you have to make damn sure that you have very, very skilled, intelligent, driven people trying to find the truth in whatever given subject, race, politics, etc. And then there's the hope that from that will emerge truth. I guess I strayed away from steel manning, the opposite of freedom of speech. And then this shit gets weird, man. Because especially in the day and age we're living in right now, where just agreeing on what is true or not often becomes, especially in hot topics, this often becomes one of the biggest obstacles in the conversation, the argument, the debate. Agreeing what sources of information are valid. And then, well, maybe if we can't figure out what sources of information are valid, there becomes a potential, maybe even a greater potential, for liars or for people that are simply very convincing but wrong to gain power in the realm of thought and ideas, which can then lead to the realm of legislation and things along those lines. And so maybe we should clamp down on these sources of information. We shouldn't let people look at whatever source of information they want to. We should create a realm of valid ideas, only a few websites that have very strict rules for what information gets to be displayed there. And this is what the people get to look at. And then, there we go. Now where everyone gets to just see this valid, very well filtered information. But then, of course, you run into the issue of who's filtering the information. Why can I trust that person? And even if that person doesn't have malicious intent, why should I trust that they're not human? Meaning that they're not prone to error from time to time. And that people should be able to question and throw out opposing ideas and just create other sources of information. Ooh, that's a tough one. I personally believe, how should I say this? At the moment, personally, I like the vast sources of information that we have access to today. But what comes with that is a responsibility to know how to sift through that effectively. And perhaps even a responsibility to seek out people you disagree with. People who make very good points that you disagree with. Because I found they often have a lot to teach you, even if sometimes it hurts learning that lesson. And to jump from this for a second, I'm listening to this book, Why Nations Fail. If you're interested in this subject, highly recommend it. It's an audiobook on Audible. Which, by the way, great. Never mind. I'm not going to go down the road of promoting Audible, but it's a great fucking app. It's a great app. You should get it. Why Nations Fail. Franklin Roosevelt. During Franklin Roosevelt's time as president, he helped bring the nation out of the Great Depression. And in the heat of some of the worst moments in the Great Depression, he passed a law that he believed would help improve the state of the country economically, and it got passed. But it barely got passed. It went to the Supreme Court, and I think if one of the judges voted a different way, it wouldn't have been passed. So 2 years after that law had been passed, the specifics of which I forget, but that's not the point. 2 years after that law had been passed, Franklin Roosevelt was addressing the nation. He says, look, this law that was passed was incredibly helpful. Look around you. Look how many more people have jobs, how much more money we have as a country. It worked. But it was very, very close to not working. It was very close to not being voted into law. And so there exists in the Supreme Court a dangerous element. He gave a speech, something to this effect. There is in the Supreme Court a risk that the next time a law that important needs to get passed, it won't get passed because those people are so incompetent, or maybe they're overworked and they're tired. And I think we should add new blood into the system. And he tried to get that passed. He wasn't allowed to. The majority of Americans disagreed with that being constitutional, and a lot of people were afraid of where that would lead. They thought it was a slippery slope. If they gave him access to add new judges, which of course he would be picking, which of course increases the probability, if my understanding is correct, increases the probability that ideas he supports will become law. And the book brings up the point that it listed two, I think, Venezuela and Peru. I can't remember the exact names, but two countries in South America where the leader did a similar thing. The country was in a bad state. They passed the law barely, if I remember correctly. And they said, well, look, these judges, they're overworked. They're too tired. They can't make good decisions. And if we keep these people functioning as they are today, the country will go to shit. So you need to allow me, since I've made these good decisions in the past, to add new people to this court. Trust me, I've made good decisions in the past. Trust that I will make good decisions in adding new court members. And they were allowed to. And then they said, well, look, these people in this other body of the government, well, they're not working so efficiently. And there was some resistance against that. So for the good of the people, the good of the nation, they use police force, violent force, to put new people into that part of the government. One thing leads to another. And pretty soon they have a dictatorship. Whether or not that's what Franklin Roosevelt wanted, maybe he had the best of intentions. I must admit, when I was first hearing his speech that they gave in the book, they didn't yet tell me the examples of where that similar situation went very wrong in other countries. And I was like, you know what? He's making some good points. What if those people didn't elect or didn't vote to have that law passed? Well, the Great Depression could have gotten worse. Maybe he's right. Maybe he should be allowed to put new judges into the Supreme Court. And then this leads me to the old historical rule of thumb, something along those lines. Rule of thumb that when a dictatorship or someone really wants to gain control of a nation, they tend to get rid of the intellectuals. They tend to get rid of the people who, for example, knew the history, knew the risks of allowing such a law to be passed. Got rid of the people who could articulate very well why that might be a bad idea. And then I look at our education system, or at least my experience in our public education system, and I'm not sure what to make of it. I personally was very uninspired in my school career to put any real focus into any of the subjects, except ones that I really liked. Now, is that the fault of the school, the fault of me, the fault of my parents, the fault of our culture, the fault of my peers? I'm not exactly sure. But the end result being, I didn't learn nearly as much as I could have from my time in public school in relationship to the subjects being taught. I learned other things, mostly about smoking weed, and that might be an exaggeration, about hanging out with friends, things along those lines, playing video games. Yeah, that's a lot more where my focus lied. And as I begin to take more seriously what it means to be a citizen of America, what responsibility do I have to make sure that we do not fall into a state of dystopia, of desolation? What responsibility do you have? I'm not trying to wag my finger at you and you should do this, because I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you even want for your life or for this country. But I wonder, what does it take in a country like ours to thrive? What sort of citizens are required to thrive? And if someone put a gun to my head and told me to place a bet right now, what qualities would increase the probability that America thrived? And when I say thrive, I mean more people being more genuinely, non-regrettably happy, more monetarily well off, so they can go on vacation, have health care, dental care, functioning cars, good clothes, buildings that don't fall apart, air conditioning, etc. And then also, happiness and safety, where they don't live in a country where they're worried about being robbed or attacked or raped and things along those lines, where the road isn't full of potholes, and where you have food in your cabinet, and your family is functioning well, that they're mentally healthy, physically healthy, that you can do things where you're actually fully absorbed in life in a positive way. Not fully absorbed in the sense of someone stabbed me in the foot. I'd be pretty absorbed in that sensation. But I mean to be fully absorbed in life in a positive way, where you're maybe even excited for the future, despite the hardships that seem to be a necessity of life. What kind of citizens would it take to create that sort of country? So, gun to my head, I'd probably say more informed about history, about how our political system works, about where power lies in our country and how power moves about. Teach people how to be mentally healthy. Maybe some mindfulness practices, and teach them a wide range of subjects. That part I'm less sure about. But there does seem to be some utility in exposing people to subjects that they don't necessarily enjoy learning about, just to help you think in different ways, to think like an engineer or like an artist or like a scientist or like an entrepreneur or like an economist. There definitely seems to be utility in that, in the artist's way of thinking, to be able to flex your imagination a little more, get more creative. And maybe if you're an engineer by trade and by love, you love engineering, that ability to be more flexible in your ways of thinking and what you can imagine to be possible might be helpful. Um, but damn, one of the biggest things I saw in school was just the lack of caring. Certainly in me and perhaps in other students too. Like, if you were given the option oftentimes where you could cheat and get away with it or actually learn the subject, I saw a lot of people cheat instead, which to me implies that they didn't really care about the subject or find it worth learning. I've heard people who own leadership consulting businesses describe the importance of telling the lower level troops why it is useful to them to, let's say there's a new sales plan being implemented. You have to use this new sales technique because it'll help make the company more money. And then, that's good for the company. But that's not very inspiring for people. Like, no, do that because then you're more likely to move up in the company. The company will make more money. They can give you more money. You'll have better benefits. Then you'll have more ability to expand your lifestyle, buy more things you like. It can increase the morale of the environment because now you're actually making sales and you're probably going to feel better about that. When you feel better about that, you're going to feel better throughout your day. When you go back home, you'll feel better. You won't be so pissed off because you're trying to make all these sales and they're not working, et cetera, et cetera. And to teach kids some equivalent when trying to teach them a subject. Not just say college, 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 but really show them in a way that takes into account the modern technologies, why these things are useful. History is an easy one. What would be a difficult one to try and justify to a kid? Shakespeare. All right. Let's try and steel man the argument of Shakespearean education in high school. I haven't talked to high schoolers in so long. Kind of forget what motivates a high schooler. What was I motivated by at the time? That's boring. I'll go to a different subject. Yeah, man, what would it take to have citizens who thrive? And of course we are, from what I've seen, I know I've talked about this before on the podcast, but there's so much beauty to America. Not to suck our dick too much. I don't want to choke on it. I recognize there's evil to it. And my God, why don't we teach people that? I think that might be helpful to making our country thrive. The individuals in it thrive. Teach them about our dark side, what leads us to that dark side. Oh man, I'm listening to this book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. And I'm still in the beginning. They're talking about Hitler. Hitler's life leading up to running the country. And it's a fucking wild story. It's this pretty insignificant kid who didn't get great marks in school, kind of tried to be an artist, didn't get into the art schools he tried to get into. That didn't really work out for him as a career either. He did a bunch of odd jobs. He was homeless for a while. Like, imagine a person who was homeless becoming the president. It's a wild story. And one of the most fucked up parts I have to contend with is that if I didn't know the atrocities that it led to, there were times where I might support that story. And please give me a chance to justify what it is I'm saying. There was a description of when he won the vote to become chancellor, which I'm quite sure that's the equivalent to the president of Germany at the time. And they said he was like a kid. He was dancing. He was giddy. He was like dancing with other party members. And if I saw that in a movie and you remove the incredible anti-Semitism, Remove his deep resentment for non-German people. Just the idea of the underdog who was fucking homeless. He was a vagabond. He was the brokest of broke. The most powerless of powerless. And he rises through the ranks and somehow, spectacularly, becomes the leader of the fucking nation. I mean, there's a part of me that's like, that's a badass story. But then, of course, obviously, it leads to horror. Hell. It leads to hell. It seems to be the best way to describe it. Hell on earth. And it's so strange to recognize that there's a fair amount of pleasure and joy that can accompany a path to hell. And this is something that I struggle with sometimes because, you know, I'm sure you know the saying, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. And I try to come up with a mantra for myself, you know. I will be the kind of man who does nothing as soon as possible. I will be the kind of man who does nothing he regrets. I will live my best life. And there's a fear in the back of my head when I say these mantras. This fear of, what if me going balls to the wall to live the most spectacular, best life I could ever live, that I could ever possibly live? What if I end up going down a path where one day, somehow, I learn one pertinent piece of information, or all the things I've done kind of hit me, you know? Like the equivalent to finding out the person you've been dating cheated on you, right? And then all those years of this person being the love of your life, this most beautiful, best part of life, in a split second, one snap of new information being given to you, and you are just put into like deepest depths of hell, like the worst of the worst. And sometimes I fear that in this great pursuit of living out my personal legend, you know, that one day I'll look at it and be like, oh no, fuck. I have dug myself into an inescapable pit of hell. But what a lighthearted transition. But going back to the man in the arena quote, I am the man in the arena, and so are you, or the woman, the person in the arena. Hopefully you get what I'm saying. I don't want to be a timid soul who never tasted victory nor defeat. I've been that person before. I've been a coward. I've been timid. I haven't liked what life tastes like when I embody that spirit. It's regrettable. It is full of regret. But this is what I wanted to say. Artist Grimes. On the Lex Fridman podcast, she brought up a point. How she wants to see more positive art enter the mainstream of the art realm, you know? So many movies about the future nowadays are apocalyptic. They're hellish. They're dystopian. They're just fucked up futures. And I recognize, like I was saying earlier, there's this fear I have sometimes when I go over those mantras or aim for the best life possible. And I think it's useful to have those fears, those dark fantasies that kind of keep you in check, but to also pair those with the golden fantasy, to have these ideas for the future, these fantastical, wonderful, imagined realities for the future, like a Star Trek, where we're out amongst the stars and we're not just raping and pillaging and decimating the fucking universe and draining it of its soul, but we're imbuing it with wonder, heaven. We're bringing heaven on earth here, now, living it, where people can be happy in a genuine, not in a Brave New World sort of sense where I'm just, anytime the slightest bad thing happens, I insert my drug where I just feel great all the time. I can just feel great all the time. My mom just died. Fuck it. Beep. I'm feeling great. You know, someone just tried to kill me. Fuck it. Beep. I'm feeling great. I don't, like, no, that seems fucked up, but yeah, fuck yeah, man. I really wonder, like, what would that look like? Heaven on earth, where you're fully absorbed in life, excited for the future, and where at the end of life, when you look back, you don't regret it. Wow. And yet, I don't want to go too far down that route, where I'm blinded to the possibility of hell, which is so weird for me. I really wonder sometimes. You'll hear opposing schools of thought. Some people who are very high performer in a given field will really adamantly only promote positive visualization. We're only positively imagining the best outcome possible. And then I've heard some other very high performers describe the importance of really visualizing both the worst and the best outcome of whatever it is you're trying to do. I prefer the latter, generally speaking. Negative emotion can be a very useful driver. And then I'll dive into something I've learned recently, going back to Andrew Huberman on the Jocko podcast, and on his own podcast, it's called Huberman Lab. He describes... Oh, shit. Gotten into this. I've been doing it a while. All right, real quick. I'll leave you with this. He describes relationship between dopamine and pain. And that for the majority of human history, the way our minds have evolved, the way our minds are designed, is to put out effort before getting a reward. To not just have an easily accessible reward that requires almost no effort. And the example of that could be, I go inside my house and I know there's ice cream there. I know there's copious amounts of food. I go on my phone. I know there's beautiful women I can fantasize about having sex with on this. I know there's a dispensary nearby and a liquor store. I can go drive there and quickly get a nice, good feeling in a snap. But he describes this in a much more technical way, and I need to learn more about that for sure. But I'll describe it into my essence way, where I get the essence of it. Just imagine a hunt or foraging that would take a good amount of effort, where you're going out there and you're maybe going on long jogs. There's a physical strain. Whether you wake up and you're tired in the morning doesn't fucking matter, because you have to survive, go put out some effort that might feel uncomfortable, that there might be a certain feeling and desire that you must overcome, that you must inhibit to gain this essential part of life. And then when you get it, oh, fuck yeah, I got the kill. I have food now for my family, for me. Or I'm foraging. I found this store of blueberries. Oh, we get to eat now. We get to live another day. Which has been useful. because some of the worst, most depressing and most depressing moments I've ever felt have been where I was just doing something pleasure to pleasure to pleasure to pleasure, and then I'm just sitting there in this. Because apparently, he described, if I remember correctly, that effort restores dopamine. And so if you just do a bunch of things that are high concentration of dopamine, like I'm listening to music while I'm smoking weed, while I'm sitting and just enjoying I'm sitting while I'm smoking, listening to music, and then maybe I'm playing video games, like that can drain the dopamine stores really quick, and then you're just feeling unmotivated and shitty. And a good way to restore them is, I believe he described effort as essentially anything in which you have to inhibit a desire, right? So if I'm sitting here and I want to pick up my phone and look at something, just the act of not doing that is a form of effort and can restore dopamine. Definitely watch that episode and just look into Andrew Huberman, Huberman, to learn a more detailed version of this. So continuing. That's been a great source of joy for me these past few days. But I will tack this on top of that. I was listening to artists who lived with hunter-gatherers, modern-day hunter-gatherers, for a few months, and he says in all the nature Nat Geo documentaries, you often see them with the stern face, like Kratos, just going through their tasks and their day. But he said when he lived with them, they were joking constantly. Fart jokes, all their sorts of jokes. He couldn't speak their language. He had an interpreter, but they were going about this uncomfortable task of they're going on these long runs in very hot environment for many hours of the day, very often. So there's some physical discomfort involved in that, although I'm sure they're extremely fit, so maybe it doesn't feel that bad for them. But they are adding into that a whole lot of humor. So at least endorphins. I don't know what else is stacked onto laughter. And the reason I say this is sometimes I've leaned too much towards the stoic, go through discomfort and face your pain. And, that's just how you thrive. That's life. But there does seem to be another element of, like, this character, Luffy, on my forearm, or Iroh in Avatar, or Rafiki in The Lion King. They're these characters which very skilled, very disciplined, very morally straight, powerful, and they do what needs to be done, even though sometimes it's a very uncomfortable thing. But they seem often quite happy, quick to laugh, to have a smile on their face. So I really wonder what the balance is to strike between effort and joy. And I will leave you with that for now. Thank you for listening.